West saloons were the pinnacle rest stop for travelers, gamblers, and drinkers alike. But how gross was the average Wild West saloon? The word comes from the French salon, and it originally had the same meaning, living room, as later on saloon meant hall, especially one on a boat or a train. In 1800s America, it came to meaning public house or bar. Saloons in its establishment originated as a liquor house, as the first saloon was established at Brown's Hole, Wyoming in 1822 to serve fur trappers. By 1880, the growth of saloons was in full swing. In Leavenworth, Kansas, there was about 150 saloons and 4 wholesale liquor houses. Some saloons in the Old West were little more than casino, brothels, and illegal substance dens. As in the saloons of the Wild West, drinking was certainly a very popular activity, but there was more to it than just alcohol. Saloons often served foods such as a simple meal or snacks to accompany the drinks, as some saloons also hosted entertainment such as live music, dancing, gambling, and even theatrical performances. But the food and drinks weren't always sanitary, as it was rare for one to come across clean water. So drinking whiskey was pretty super common, as well as beer and other forms of alcohol distilled. But aside the yeehaw and crime and punishments, there was also a lot of weird things in the Wild West that aren't as jarring, like how your bed would be full of squirrels. And I'm not saying like alive squirrels, although maybe. Some of the dead squirrels that they would find would be helpful to stuff your bed, so it'd be a little softer when you stayed the night. Also, everyone smelled bad, really bad, considering there wasn't any forms of pipes or running water for miles, as water would be stagnant in the water towers and not a lot of filtration was made. The acidic and boracic acid smelling water would linger not just on you, but also on your clothes. If you were lucky, you might be able to bathe maybe once a week, as it took some time as well to warm up your bathtub, as heated water wasn't also available for the times. Other than these type of cleaning hygienics like bathing, when it came to oral care like brushing your teeth, people in the Old West used a variety of methods to clean their teeth. Some common practices include a toothbrush made out of animal hair or plant fibers, and brushing with a mixture of water and baking soda or salt. Chewing on twigs or rough cloths to rub their teeth were also very common methods, as health care like oral dental care often meant tooth extractions, as other aspects were pretty much a privilege of what we're having today that did not exist back then. As well as going to the outhouse was a more common thing than going to one in the saloon, as it would have probably stunk up the establishment and prevented customers from arriving. But that still didn't prevent people to do what the French did, which is to pee in a corner. So in the Old West, people would use a variety of materials for toilet paper, including leaves, corn cobs, newspapers, and even old catalog pages. Soft, commercial-produced toilet paper, as we are very privileged to know today, didn't become very widely available until the late 19th century. And since they didn't have plumbing, as these outhouses were so common and gross, they stunk, as they attracted many types of wildlife to slither their way in with you. They had bugs like black widows, and if you're extra unlucky, maybe even poisonous snakes. Also, because of the trades of goods of many were tobacco, spittoons were located everywhere. In almost every saloon, if not, you'd be finding yourself slipping on someone else's spit. Due to the widespread of the chewing tobacco in the 19th century, spittoons were a common fixture in public areas, including railroad stations. Their intended purposes was collecting tobacco juice spit from a distance, so typically they were built heavy and low to the ground. So with a wide mouth or funnel top, in the United States, public health departments launched an anti-spitting campaign to stop the spread of TB, as it became more and more aggressive in smaller populated areas. Tuberculosis had forced some of these states as spitting to be illegal, as it still is, and by the mid-20th century, spittoons were finally gone from most public spaces in the United States. I don't really think right now they still have spittoons, but that's gross. Even the towels used to clean the bathroom and the bars at saloons were the same towels you'd wipe your face if you had too much beer foam. People kept spitting, and so it was so outlawed that because of the respiratory disease went rampant in the regions, if you kept spitting, you'd be charged with a $500 fine. But either way, the Wild West, from the daily politics to hygienes, times do be changing and the world keeps on spinning. With gambling as super apparent in saloons as it was also useful pastime, it was also a risk if you were a cheat, and you might also have to cheat death, because you're not supposed to do that. Some, like the weapon fight at the OK Corral, were the outcome of long simmering feuds and rivalries, but most were the result of confrontation between outlaws and law enforcement. Although in movies, televisions would like to us believe otherwise, it was very rare when pew-pew fights occurred with the two standing fighters off squarely facing one another from a distance in a dusty street. They would just knock your butt out. The romanticized image of the Old West style fight was born in the dime novels of the late 19th century and perpetuated in film era to make such a point that this fiction version of what our mind's eye quickly conjures up when we hear the word weapon fight. You know what I mean. In actuality, the real fights of the Old West were actually so rarely civilized that yes, we might have heard some of these famed robber criminals like sharpshooters like Billy the Kid, Calamity Jane, Jesse James, and Annie Oakley, they wouldn't really wait unlike Clint Eastwood films. It was probably more rotted than it was organized, and the Wild West saloons were also known for its culture of its violence. Weapon slingers and outlaws, as I mentioned, often frequent these establishments, and disputes were often settled with a handheld weapon fight. Even saloon owners would also provide their own weapons for their patrons, and saloons itself would become a battleground during an open firefight. Saloons would also appear in every town and were your average pit stop on a long journey, and if you're a man who hasn't seen or felt the touch of a woman in a very long time, and you can afford it, you might stop by to a certain saloon for a drink and quench whatever thirsty self you might be craving. Like a gentleman's club, most Wild West saloons catered almost exclusively to the white men in the frontier, although women could sometimes find work in the bars as dance hall girls or workers of the evening. But of course you have the madam of the house making sure the security of her girls are okay, but when it comes to money and gold rushes, it was pretty much more valuable than the average person's life. Respectable women didn't frequent Wild West saloons, but women who were less concerned about their reputations might find work there. Many saloon girls were widows and had no other means of support, or young girls who were seeking something more than working on their family farm. They wanted adventure, if you know what I mean. The girls were to dance with the men and get the men to buy them drinks, earning as much as $10 per week, which is pretty a lot for back then. Most saloon girls also made commissions from the drinks they sold, and whiskey sold to the customers were generally marked up to 30 to 60% over its wholesale price. But like all dames who worked in these type of eras, were definitely in her bag, as her status would be noted and gossiped throughout town. One famous saloon girl was also named Fanny Porter. Fanny's family arrived in Texas when she was just 1 year old, immigrating from England. Growing up as both an immigrant and the middle of the Wild West may have inspired her to enter the sporting life, as she took up the trade as a teenager and opened up her own brothel at the age of 20 in San Antonio. In some ways though, these saloons would have been another term for these women of the night to rebrand themselves as cantina girls. However, despite themselves and the services they provide, their life expectancies were actually short. In a typical night, and I'm not just talking about in case, someone does something to them, it was because of the drinking. A woman may have to have consumed up to 30 beers a night. An average lifespan of a woman in the cantina trade was less than a decade. Like as in current times in Japan, they also have these host clubs that if you go and meet these very handsome and beautiful people, you would also be forced to drink with them. And like the cantina girls back in the Wild West, a lot of these people would have suffered a lot of liver issues, which means cantina girls still exist today, just not where we are well known of. And since I mentioned it was so dirty, they'd even bring their horses in the saloon. Like the idea of the Wild West and anyone could do anything they want. That also included bringing your horse inside of the bar to take a selfie with. Like in this photo, where the men of the saloon located in Utah took their horse to be part of the group chat profile pic, and I think my favorite part of this photo is how the bartender is also posing. But despite how gross it was back then, even part of the historical tourist attractions, there are some saloons still open and even in operation today. Saloons like the White Elephant in Fort Worth, Texas, was one of the more than 60 Wild West saloons in the city, and at the end of the 19th century, it is actually still open today for functioning, albeit in a different building. But it still holds a lot of significance, as it holds a lot of memento, part of American Western history.
Number 10. Boot Hill Burials. In the Old West, many towns had a boot hill, which was essentially a graveyard where outlaws and bandits and all those bad people alike were all buried with their boots on. Specifically with those on right there. See, these cemeteries were often lacking proper markings, and the dead were buried quickly, sometimes a little too quick without a coffin, reflecting the harsh and lawless nature of frontier life. It wouldn't be abnormal to see a boot sticking up out of the ground on your way home from work, is what I'm saying. Today that would be quite jarring, but back then, completely normal. How yucky is that? I'm like, oh, size 11.5? Perfect. Number 9. Medical practices. In the Old West, broken bones were a common occurrence. Obviously, uneven roads, hopping up and down horses, everything's made of wood that's all broken. Particularly among those who worked in physically demanding professions such as ranchers, miners, and cowboys, everything is going to be broken on your body by the end of the day. Treatment options were limited and often relied on basic first aid techniques, splinting the affected area with whatever materials were available. Wood, cloth, animal bones. It was nuts. It sounds crazy, but back then, it was really the only method for immobilizing broken bones. You have to wrap another bone around it. It's like, ew, please, can I get a cleaner bone? Pain relief was only provided with natural remedies such as opium or willow bark tea, so 50-50 what kind of night you're gonna have there. More serious fractures, such as those that punctured the skin, ow, those required the attention of a doctor or a surgeon. However, back then the doctor had like 2 teeth in 1 eye, so not much help. Number 8, duels. Yes, duels. Let's talk about these. Duels, gotta say it all deep like. Duels were a common way to resolve disputes. Before YouTube comments, this was the only place to resolve any conflict, alright? In a traditional old Western duel, opponents would face each other often with weapons, in front of a crowd at a designated location and time. Now, most of the time, these duels would end when somebody bites the bullet. Rarely would a duel end with two gentlemen shaking hands, getting over their disagreements. No, never happened. These confrontations, often over matters of honor, were deadly and a normalized part of the culture. Number 7. Law enforcement. That being said, back in the day, things were a little different. Not that many body cam back in those days, I'll tell you that for free. With a lack of formal law enforcement, communities often took justice into their own hands. They're like, oh yes, all 17 of us, we've decided, you're out of here. Vigilante coups would form to hunt down suspected criminals, often resulting in brutal forms of punishment without a formal trial. Yeah, no judges needed, no jury duty, nothing like that. The town ended the conflict in 48 seconds. You're welcome, let's get a beer. Let's get a really disgusting beer. Number 6, public punishments. Now, when I say the town handled it, this is what I mean. We gotta go into detail here, because that's why I'm here. Public hangings were often treated as a social event, with crowds gathering to watch as if it were entertainment. How disgusting is that? They were dressed to the nines, they grabbed the whole family. People would come from miles around, sometimes with picnics, to witness this brutal punishment. Yeah, picnic. What food do you pack for a hanging? Nothing with a crunch, that's for sure. You don't want to ruin the show for the people around you. Sorry. Number 5, banking. Today, online banking is super easy, but back in the Old West days, you didn't get a courtesy email, you didn't have overdraft, nothing like that. In fact, the United States national banking system didn't even exist until 1863. So what happened before then? Are we just hiding our money in our underwear? What are we doing? Before then, you'd have what were called wildcat banks. And these wildcat banks would take deposits for a short amount of time, and then unannounced, out of nowhere, they would run. They would disappear overnight with all of your money, everything, your whole life savings, gone. They did the long con. They played the long game. They were actors. So you're telling me they pretended to be bankers for months at a time? That's almost impressive. They'd have the fake mustache. Oh, good morning, sir. Sign here, please. They lied. They faked it for months. They just lied for months and then dipped out of nowhere. Thankfully, after 1863, a noble profession was to work at a bank and, not steal everybody's money. The Hudson Bay Company, Wells Fargo, these big names, they all gained trust over time because of these fake Looney Tune banks. Imagine, how do you not break character? You're like, okay, and that's you all set up. They're like, we got it, go. Number 4, seam squirrels. Nothing to do with squirrels before you get upset. Here we go. During the Old West era, personal hygiene was not a priority for many people, and lice infestations were all too common. Nice, now I'm itchy doing this list, love that. The type of lice that affected people during this time was commonly known as body lice, which could be, well, obviously found in the seams of clothing, hence the term seam squirrels. I got some squirrels on my body, nice, that's great, so itchy, so disgusting. Body lice was a major problem during the Old West era, and they were responsible for the spread of diseases like typhus, trench fever, relapsing fever, all the fevers, any fever just coming your way, right into your mouth and eyes, horrible. These diseases were often fatal, and many people in the Old West succumbed to them. So to combat the spread of lice and the diseases that they carried, people in the Old West often resorted to extreme measures, such as burning their clothing or even shaving their heads completely bald. Bunch of bald cowboys. Bunch of naked bald cowboys walking around being like, where's my money? I thought this was a bank. Number 3, resurrectionalist. While Boot Hill sees folks going into the ground, a resurrectionalist was responsible for the exact opposite. Yeah, bring him back up. We actually made a mistake. Get that guy back out of there. These guys were responsible for digging up dead bodies, and then they would sell them to medical schools for like $9. It was really disgusting. Now, this was the late 1820s, and at this time in Edinburgh, Scotland, believe it or not, the medical science community was on the up and up, so this was needed for that to work. But in order to study new medicines and, avoid the next plague, they needed these guys. They needed these resurrectionalists to rise the dead like they're a White Walker in Game of Thrones. I don't know, that's what I imagine in my head. Would you rather work a Boot Hill type job, or would you rather get paid to dig up bodies? Put them in or take them out? Comment down below. Both are so horrible. Couldn't imagine picking. Number 2, bad bartenders. When we think of old saloons, the old Western saloons, kicking in those crazy doors, we imagine some catchphrases and whiskey and all that fun stuff. Everyone's loud, it's Peaky Blinders, whatever. No, not at all. It was the exact opposite of fun. The bartender would pour a drink, the cowboy would take the bottle instead because he's an alcoholic, and also that's super illegal. Back in the Wild West days, you could do whatever you want. You could drink what you want, you could serve what you want. anything goes. Bartenders also had no regulations to follow behind that sketchy bar. So not only was it very high proof, but some bevies like tarantula juice would just straight up kill you. Yeah, if its name didn't tip you off, if you're drinking tarantula juice, it's because it's made with poisonous ingredients. Tarantula juice was made from strychnine, and if you drink it, well, you'll feel like there's tarantulas crawling all over your skin. Huh, how fun is that? Cool. Which button do I press to not tip? Thanks so much. Number 1, medical shows. Today, medical shows are fascinating. Even on YouTube, Dr. Pimple Popper, are you kidding me? I can gag all day and watch that, it's the best. Back in the Wild West, the 1860s to the 1890s specifically, they had what's called medicinal showmen. Now these guys, these showstoppers, they would show up in your town selling elixirs and tonics because everyone needed one, of course. Everyone needs to live a happy and comfortable life, but they were full of lies. Don't listen to these guys, all right? These professional medicinal showmen would have pawns run ahead, stay in your town, and then wait. They would plant themselves in the audience before these random demonstrations of amazing medical elixir shows began. So they'd call up random audience members, one of these being their buddy, and then these magical elixirs would treat their ailments just like that. What an amazing show. I'm in. I'm gonna buy this immediately. One of the most successful of these elixirs was the elixir made from John Healy and Charles Bigelow. It was a mixture of herbs, roots, and animal fat, and it was said to treat any illness back in the day. But in reality, it was an extremely strong laxative. So imagine finding that out on the way home. You're like, hey, I'm exploding out of my body. What's going on? I don't think that worked back there.
Number 10, Amelia Earhart. An American aviation pioneer and celebrated figure in the early 20th century, Amelia Earhart was the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Notably, in 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean, covering a distance of over 2,000 miles from Newfoundland, Canada to Northern Ireland. Beyond her aviation achievements, Earhart was a prominent advocate for women's rights. She encouraged women to pursue careers and goals that were traditionally considered to be male-dominated. Earhart was also an author and a popular public speaker, which I wish I could do, and she wrote several books about her experience in aviation and women's issues. In this photo, what seems to be a normal photo of Amelia is actually the last photo we have of her before she went missing. She may have survived her round-the-world attempt only to be later captured by Japanese forces. According to a newly discovered photograph, and according to the new History Channel documentary, the photo is found in a National Archive file as it is shown Earhart alive after her plane fell low on fuel during her mission. The photo depicts a woman believing to be Earhart and a man who looked like her navigator, Fred. A Japanese ship can be seen in the background, carrying what appears to be her plane, as her fate has been debated for decades and has sparked several conspiracy theories. What do you guys think? Or are people just hopeful? Number 9, volcano. We all love a good nature tour or park hike, but for this man, David Johnston, he really loved the nature of volcanoes and geology, and ultimately pursued his education in the field. He was working with the US Geological Survey at the Cascades Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington, and he was assigned to monitor the activity of Mount St. Helens, a stratovolcano that had been showing recently a lot of activity. This photo is when he was doing his research on the earthly giant, but tragically on May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted explosively, triggering a massive landslide and a pyroclastic flow. David Johnston was stationed at the observation post on the ridge known as Coldwater 2, about 6 miles north of the volcano. He radioed in the now famous message, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it!" to his colleagues at the USGS headquarters, alerting them to the eruption. Regrettably, Johnston's post was directly in the path of the advancing pyroclastic flow, and he perished in the eruption alongside with many others. His body was unfortunately never recovered, and he was only 30 years old. Number 8, the 1986 Challenger. I love space, and I think space is really amazing and cool, as so did these guys, the crew members of the Challenger: Francis R. Scooby, Michael J. Smith, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, and Christina McAuliffe. The Challenger mission was unique because it included Christina, a civilian schoolteacher who was selected to be the first private citizen to fly in space as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. However, the Challenger suffered a massive disaster when the failure of an O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. Cold temperatures on the morning of the launch weakened the O-ring's elasticity, allowing hot gases to escape and damage the external fuel tank, leading to an explosion that was witnessed by millions of people around the world, and it was a devastating blow to NASA and the space program. Following the disaster, the space shuttle program was suspended for over 2 years, and significant changes were made to the shuttle's design and launch protocols. After its investigation, the disaster also led to a renewal focus on the importance of safety in human spaceflight. Number 7. Menendez brothers. We're all fans of something, whether it's art, music, or sports, and for the Menendez brothers, they would be so excited to see that they happen to be in the photo card. But the most disturbing part of this photo is the fact that these two killed their parents before the photo was even taken. They went on a 6-month spending binge with their money. The case was so shocking to the media, including how after the deaths occurred, the brothers went to watch James Bond's License to Kill and tried to use it as an alibi. How a week prior their mother confided to her therapist that she was worried that her sons were psychopaths, and how one brother bought an entire chicken wing restaurant with the parents' money after they had passed away. Their father was an executive in the entertainment industry and both went into private schools, and the older brother Lyle was briefly enrolled in Princeton. After 2 deadlocked juries, LA prosecutors retired the brothers in a courtroom that did not allow cameras, and the new jury found them guilty on 2 counts of the first degree. They were sentenced by the judge to life in prison. Number 6. Aquino. Filipino people have been known to fight resistance against imperialism and oppressors, as that seems to be all of our history to be composed of, and that is the truth. And for Ninoy Aquino, he was a posing threat as the political activist against the long dictatorship and assailant of the martial law, Ferdinand Marcos. He tried to run for president in 1973, but then Marcos declared martial law in 1972, preventing him to run. Benigno Aquino, or as we know by his nickname Ninoy Aquino, was imprisoned by the Marcos regime for speaking out against him, where he was locked in prison and tormented for 7 years. It wasn't until he suffered a heart attack did Marcos' wife Imelda allowed him to go to the United States to get treatment, only under the condition that he does not come back home to the Philippines. But Aquino knew that his love for the people and the Philippines was more important, as there were many people wrongfully prosecuted or just be found dead on the street for protesting against Marcos. He did plan to go back, and before he arrived to the Philippines, he warned reporters, "Hey, this might be the last time you ever actually speak to me," and he was right. In this photo was the photo before he left the plane out towards the Philippines airport. He kept saying he had a bulletproof vest on, but the assailant shot him in the head. There were countless reporters that day that knew something was going on, only for them to be all shocked to see his body on the ground. There's even footage of his assassination online, and his death sparked an outrage throughout all of the Philippines asking for justice. But of course, the United States always has to get involved in something, and they were able to get the Marcos family out of persecution from the very people he tormented and controlled for years. Number 5. Tyler Hadley. Everyone likes a good party selfie, including Tyler Hadley, who we can see here drinking a party cup with some friends. But what they don't know is that if they walked into the master bedroom was the killed bodies of his parents that he ended moments before the party. Tyler allegedly decided how he wanted to commit the crime a few weeks prior to committing them. He often told a friend exactly what he was planning to do at the time, noting that having a big party after a parricide had never been done before. Shortly after noon, Tyler wrote on his Facebook wall, "Party at my crib tonight. Maybe." Around 60 people attended the party at that night, and several had alleged to have noticed the smell of dead bodies. Gross. During the party, Tyler apparently told several people about what he had done. Tyler went on a short walk with a friend and Michael Mandel and confessed the crime. After returning to the party, Mandel discovered the bodies of Blake and Mary Jo in the master bedroom. Mandel did not leave the party immediately. In fact, he had continued to spend hours with Tyler and even took a selfie with him, which is what we see. 4 hours later, Mandel left the party and called the local crime hotline to report the incident, which is pretty smart on his end, because if he did something, then, Tyler would have done something to him. News of the crime was then spread by word of mouth, and Hadley was arrested early in the next morning. Number 4. Tank Man. When it comes to revolution, all it takes is one person. After all, a single grain of rice can tip the scale. The Tank Man photograph was taken on the morning of the 5th of June, 1989, the day after the Chinese government had violently suppressed protests in Tiananmen Square. An estimated 10,000 civilians were killed in the massacre following weeks of a student-led demonstration in Beijing and beyond against the communist regimes and the suppression of basic human rights and freedom of expression. The image captures a lone man standing in the middle of the Chang'an Avenue just off the square, facing down a column of 4 slowly advancing Type 59 tanks of the Chinese army in a defiant protest. The identity of the Tank Man still remains anonymous, as people don't know what happened to him after, but he has been noted as a notable figure in the stance against militia harm to the people. Number 3. Jolie Callan. When it comes to love, if you know something is off, listen to your gut and be safe first. Unfortunately for Jolie, she only left one memory to a friend that if something ever happened to her, they know who the cause was. In 2015, 18-year-old Jolie Callan was hiking with her ex-boyfriend Lauren Bunner when he photographed her on a cliff before he pushed her off of it. The 20-year-old killer nearly escaped justice by claiming he was on the autism spectrum in court. This is the exact photo before he pushed her off. Bunner later called the cops and said, "I just want to turn myself in for the crime of my ex-girlfriend that happened just a little while ago on Cheheha Mountain." Later that evening, on August 30th, 2015, police found her body still wearing her backpack. Cops believe that he had lured Callahan, who still wanted to remain friends with her former boyfriend, there to kill her because she wouldn't take him back. The court heard him bragging to cellmates about killing the 18-year-old, saying if he couldn't have her, no one else could. Number 2. Omeg. If you're lucky, you may have had some cute outing photos with your family and friends when you were younger, and this particular photo seems like an ordinary day with a young girl and her dad, but unfortunately it was actually moments before an explosion incident caused by the real IRA, or the Real Irish Republican Army, a provincial Irish Republican Army splinter group who opposed the IRA ceasefire and the Good Friday Agreement signed earlier that year. The explosion killed 29 people and injured about 220 others. The red Vauxhall Calvaire containing the bomb, can I say bomb? The red Vauxhall Calvaire containing the explosion, this photograph was taken shortly before the explosion, and the camera was found afterwards in the rubble. The man and the child in the photo both survived, and the injured survivor, Marion Radford, described hearing an unearthly bang followed by eeriness, a darkness that had just come over the place, then screams as she saw bits of bodies, limbs on the ground while she searched for her 16-year-old son, Alan. She later discovered he had been killed yards away from her after the two became separated just minutes before the blast. And finally, number 1, Andes. Personally, one of the most creepiest photo, and it actually made me feel pretty uncomfy with this one. It seems like a cool crew cut photo of just a bunch of dudes, when in reality these are the survivors of an Air Force Flight 571 crash in the Andes. Pilot Ferradas had flown across the Andes 29 times previously, and on this flight he was training a co-pilot, La Guara, who was at the controls. As they flew through the Andes, clouds obscured the mountains, and the controller in Santiago, unaware the flight was still over the Andes, authorized him to descend to 11,500 feet. The rugby players on board joked about the turbulence at first until some passengers saw that the aircraft was very close to the mountain. That was probably the moment when the pilots saw the Black Ridge rising dead ahead. After the crash, of the 45 people on the aircraft, 3 passengers and 2 crew members of the tail section were killed when it broke apart. The survivors had little food, only 8 chocolate bars, a tin of mussels, 3 small jars of jam, a tin of almonds, a few dates, candies, dried plums, and several bottles of wine. Eventually their friends made an agreement that if they ever died, they would offer themselves for them to eat, and so they did. The group survived by collectively deciding to eat flesh from the bodies of their dead comrades, and in the photo you can see on the right, a spine. At the end, 8 people were rescued and they lived. Anyways, that's all for today, and for your next riddle, what starts with an E, ends with an E, and only has 1 letter? Be sure to put your answer in the comments below and I'll reveal the answer in the next video. Top 10 historical places haunted by demons. Now I'm excited about that one.
Kicking off the list at number 10, party hard. The term boot and rally was added to the Urban Dictionary in 2002, but Romans were riding that wave out a long time ago. They knew how to get down. Well, rather, they knew how to get it up. Ancient Romans would often make themselves puke in order to continue eating and drinking. How gross is that? What would normally be a red flag at a house party was actually a sign of respect back then. But it was business. These parties, these long, exhausting banquets, attending these was a sign of social standing. So you wanted to be around the longest. You wanted to drink the most, dance the most, and, grossly enough, puke the most. Those are the coolest Romans in town, apparently. It was so normal that you would excuse yourself from dinner and be like, excuse me, go to the vomitorium, great name, right across from the dining room. I'm sure it's a great breeze rolling through there. But then you'd go in this room, grab a feather, and then tickle thy throat, and then make room for even more lobster. What a treat. Birthday parties were never so disgusting. Number 9, gladiator blood. When Charlie Sheen started talking about drinking dragon blood, everybody looked at him like he was insane, rightfully so, but back then if you boasted about drinking gladiator blood, well, you were on the right track. Ancient Romans believed that gladiators had the literal heart of a lion, and to be fair, they were in immaculate shape. With all that long hair as well, I don't blame them. So the thought process here, being extremely superstitious, was that if you drank gladiator blood, whatever disease you had, it would soon be cured. So these Roman physicians would tell their patients with epilepsy to chug some warrior blood, like you're a vampire. Apparently it worked, like some of the time. Never really, not really. I wouldn't recommend this, don't do this. Number 8, you're in trouble. Recently we did a list on dark medical practices used in history, and in that list we talked briefly about how urine was used by ancient Romans to whiten their smile. Lovely. Fresh breath guaranteed. Well, to dive deeper into this gross fact, Romans also used urine to wash their clothes. So after they were done washing up, they would mask the smell, or at least try to, with fragrant leaves. They would use bay leaves and just rub it all over themselves, which is interesting. They didn't use soap because the amount of ammonia used in urine, well, it did the trick. Lye was also used to clean clothes at this time, but it was too pricey. So plan B was to head down to the Folones, the ancient laundromat, where everybody would just catch up and stomp on their, urine-filled clothes. Again, the smell is probably not that pleasant. Number 7, Roman art. If you've seen Superbad recently, this next one will ring a bell. I grew up watching Art Attack, okay? The British dude, Neil Butchanan, with his aggressive sidekick head that would just yell at you all day. What a fun way to learn how to draw. Well, back in the 18th century, when excavations took place in the city of Pompeii, they found lots and lots of art with a similar eggplant theme. I'm trying not to say what I really want to say here, people. Genitals carved everywhere. Carved, I said, not just like, drawn in Sharpie. Carved in the streets, carved in the walls. Just under a street sign, you'll see one of these. Just popping out at you. Hello. Just generations of genitals. Rich history, folks. The phalluses of Pompeii. Imagine tripping over one of these. You do that thing where you look back to see what you almost rolled your ankle on. Imagine looking back and seeing that in the ground. I'd be like, okay, we're just gonna keep walking. Many tour guides like to say that they all point and lead to a brothel, when in reality these were actually just for good luck. They didn't really have a purpose other than good fortune. These symbols were to ward off the evil eye. Most folk kept these outside their front homes. Right next to the mailbox. That's great, it's a good spot to put it. Number 6, new hair, new me. Glowing up these days is quite easy. Change your hair color up, throw on some jorts, listen to Adele's new album, Bob's Your Uncle. It works. It always works. But if you were an ancient Roman and you wanted to show off the new you to your ex, maybe at the vomitorium party, how would you change your hair? How would you do it? Well, it was common, but the way they used to get it done was all but. Romans would have to use goat fat and beechwood ashes to bring out those highlights. Maybe it's goat fat, maybe it's Maybelline. Again, like those crazy parties, this was a symbol of status. If your hair didn't reek of goat fat, who even are you? Get out of here. Emperor Claudius III, his wife Valeria, apparently she once dyed her hair blonde and then painted her entire body gold and then had a contest to see who could hook up with the most Romans in one night. I feel like this would have been a really good reality TV show back in the day. Number 5, bathroom hangouts. Bathroom lighting is key when you go out. Those 1 a.m. selfies never looked or felt so good. Ancient Roman times, hanging out in the bathroom with your friends was quite common, but they didn't have any neon lights or quotes and selfies. It was just a lot of bricks. Oh, and also, it smelled really bad. They didn't have the Charmin Ultra less is more lifestyle. They had to use sticks with sponges to wipe. And yeah, of course, they also had to share. Socializing in these ancient toilets was like socializing at a Starbucks. It was normal. You would spend hours here and you got done, literally. Groups of Romans would discuss business, politics, military strategies, all the while a dude's in the corner just like going to the bathroom. Romans believed the goddess Cloacina was the guardian of the toilet drain system. Cloaca Maxima translates to big drain. I guess when you invent the flushing toilet, you can call them whatever you want. Just don't call any meetings there, perhaps. Might be a good start. Number 4, no soap. Sometimes you're in a rush, it happens. You don't have time to shower, so you do the classic spray yourself with cologne and then hope that you fool the world. It's a smart move, but the ancient Romans were way ahead of you. While they didn't clean their clothes with laundry detergent, it's not shocking to hear that they also didn't use soap to wash their bodies. Instead, they rubbed perfume oil all over themselves to get rid of sweat and all that jazz, but later on, once that oil had dried up, it was then removed with a wooden wedge or a spatula-like tool called a strigil. The world's most painful loofah, sign me up. Dirt and sweat would get stuck to this oil and then subsequently just peeled off. So it did work, but it took a little more time than our usual showers nowadays, our 5-minute rushes before work. For Romans who were well off, this was a whole event. There were several assistants you could pick from all these fancy and fragrant oils. It was slow and sensual. How was anybody ever on time back then? Number 3, all the poison. There's always the one kid who's allergic to nuts on your flight. And it's horrible, now nobody gets nuts on this flight. It's tragic, really. Research shows that feeding infants peanuts or peanut products when they're around 4 to 6 months old can prevent a peanut allergy. But Roman emperors had their own way of achieving immunity. It was common for Roman kings to seek out and then consume a small amount of each known poison because they thought at the end of this grueling trial you would become immune to them all. It was a hot blend called Mithridatum, named of course after the poison's creator, Mithridates the Great. He lived until he was 80, so maybe these potions that he created might have actually worked. The world's first vaccine perhaps. Number 2, thumbs up or thumbs down. Giving somebody a thumbs up after they've done something, it feels nice. You're like, yeah. Even a sarcastic thumbs up, use those when you get cut off in traffic. In the hit film Gladiator, there's a scene where Joaquin Phoenix's character gives Russell Crowe's character a thumbs up, and in turn he lives, and then we watch cinematic redemption. In real life, ancient Romans used these thumb signs to determine a gladiator's fate in the Colosseum. It was referred to as pollice verso. It's the Latin term for a turned thumb. The crowd would vote if a gladiator should die or not, which is also insane. It's like America's Got Talent, but like insane. While it's nice to receive a say thumbs up after doing something today, if you got a thumbs up or even a thumbs down, it meant your days of living have come to an end. And finally, number 1, animals in the arena. In order to spice up the classic fight and clashing swords till death action, sometimes gladiators would be put into the arena with an animal instead of another human being. Were they squirrels, maybe an opossum, or were they tigers or elephants, bears, lions, leopards, hyenas, wolves? Oh my god, they didn't win these often, did they? Animals were very expensive, so they weren't used all the time, but the organizers of the battle would go all out for the fights if they did include them. Like Logan Paul vs. Mayweather, it's a big social event. Most animals who were used in these great battles unfortunately didn't make it out alive. That's the horrible part as well. I'm a big animal lover, so much so that I'm rooting for the elephants in these fights while reading up about this. This led to another important factor down the road. People loved when animals were included, that eventually trade in exotic animals started taking place. This quickly took the hippo from the Nile and made them extinct. Now cut to today, thousands of species are going extinct. Guys, those were just 10 mysterious things ancient Romans did. Now there's a lot more to cover, so if a part 2 is in your deepest desires, let us know in the comments down below, and we'll do the rest.
And the horse? If you love something, you gotta let it go. Or how about parading your naked wife in front of your friends in the mighty Roman military? Emperor Caligula was so impressed with his wife's beauty, he just thought he had to share it, even though apparently she wasn't that attractive, and already had children with another man. Scandalous. If she had wheels, she'd be the town bike, if you know what I'm saying. As if displaying your wife's gratuitous curves isn't scandalous enough, apparently he would use very real threats as a strange way of flirting. Clearly this was a dude who's got some issues. Like for example, the one time he wanted to humiliate the Roman Senate by claiming to make his horse a consul. Although he didn't actually go through with it. Still though, this one's all 6s and 9s, innit? This may have been related to a brothel caught disease. He might have had syphilis, I'm just saying. Number 9, no grain. Maximinus Thrax was like most Roman emperors. Seized power when he wanted, seized land when he wanted, pretty much did whatever he wanted. Strangely enough, however, he cut subsidies for grain. This was one of the many tactics to help up cover for increased taxes. Taxes that were imposed because he had doubled the pay of the military during constant military action. That's a lot of coins needed. Eventually the people had had enough. And ironically, his own guards poked him with spears until he couldn't be poked anymore. I'm not a military expert or anything, but if you're gonna wage war, you gotta have the money for it. It's kind of like when the ice cream truck comes around and you're counting quarters for a large chocolate cone because you're 12 and life is hard and you deserve it. I love the ice cream truck. Number 8, Red Roman. Emperor Caracalla was also like many other Roman emperors, as he was quite bloodthirsty, and honestly just a bad dude. He unalived his brother Geta just because he didn't like him. Good reason, I guess. Then 20,000 of his brother's followers persecuted and killed. When some good folks heard about this terrible news, and were horrified, rightfully so, I mean who wouldn't be, they too were dealt with in a non-YouTube conduct safe way. He depleted the treasury from war and let foreigners have Roman citizenship. Now I know that sounds like a good thing, but it isn't. In already trying times, it completely messed up Roman societal culture. In a sense, fire is good. It allows us many things. But Caracalla threw a whole jerry can of gasoline on the fire by doing that. When your society is built on one thing, perhaps it's a good idea to not totally flip that upside down overnight, as quick decisions like that lead to quick downfalls. Just saying though, just saying. Number 7, the light of my life. Emperor Nero was straight up just not a cool guy. This whole list could be about him, but I'm here to make you laugh, not horrify you with the horrors of Pax Romana. Nero, like most emperors, was very wealthy, the kind of wealth that only people who shop at Whole Foods can understand. As it turns out, there was a fire in Rome at the time. Burned for a long time, pretty big deal. Who started the fire? No one really knows, even though Nero himself might be a suspect. However, it would be really easy to get rid of a group of people you don't like if you blame it on them. So it was blamed on the hot new religion at the time, you gotta love them, Christians, except Nero didn't, and he was kind of egotistical, so in order to punish these scapegoated Christians, he had them set ablaze. So there was more light in his garden, so to speak, or that's what is said, at least. I know sometimes we can all disagree with our faith, but lighting each other on fire is not the answer. Mom always said if you have nothing nice to say, then don't light people on fire.
Okay, Mom.
Number 6. Not so Hercules. Commodus was like many other emperors in thinking that he was very close to the gods, but Commodus thought he was a Greek god, a reincarnated Hercules to be exact. So much so that he would often take up a role as a gladiator, which a lot of Romans thought was scandalous as a leader. A leader shouldn't be dealing with the barbarians at our gates and other lands that were persecuting and invading and taking over, rather than performing in blood sports. It was thought that this was below the office of the emperor. Rumors began to stir that because of his love for the arena, he may not be the royal bloodline claimed to be. When in the arena, his adversaries always surrendered, so he always won. In return, he wouldn't kill them, to be fair, just scarred them, as it was seen to be a good thing to be bested by the emperor and then to leave with a mark. Sure, we'll go with that. Apparently, they also brought animals in for him to slaughter in the arena for entertainment. Eventually, people had enough of him wasting time and money playing gladiator games, and he was strangled by his coach. Oh, hey coach, I'm ready for the next match. How you doing? Hey, why are you looking at me like that, man? What's wrong? And what's that rope for? Number 5. Last best hope. Romulus Augustulus was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. History gets kind of crazy after this point, but let's be real, what's more scandalous than being the last ruler of your empire? Could he have saved it? Would the world have looked different if he did? Truth be told, not a lot of records survived his reign, so we don't really know. Perhaps it's because he didn't have much time to write things down. Or maybe because he was still a minor when he inherited the failing Roman Empire. Or really it was because Rome's worst nightmare had come true. The barbarians at the gates had taken over Rome. The German barbarian general Odoacer took over and claimed himself to be the king of Italy, which ushered in the end of the Great Western Roman Empire. Talk about scandal. Number 4. Excess, excess, excess. Emperor Elagabalus is what I think of when I think of a Roman emperor. Someone who is pampered in a time where most people don't have access to really anything easily. Eating grapes off the vine, bottles of wine, and your servants are looking fine. Alright, alright, alright. His life of decadence was also matched with the classic level of unaliving those who oppose you, or rather groups that you feel need to be persecuted. Even more scandalous than that is the question of his sexuality. Oh. While being debated by historians today, there are rumors that the decadent emperor may have been having a relationship with his male chariot driver. There's also rumors of the emperor wearing women's clothes. Very scandalous indeed, oh handsome emperor. Number 3. Senate Purge. I am the Senate, said Tiberius, knowing that he had a really cool name. While not the worst emperor on this list, he did purge the Senate in times of political unrest, just like everyone's favorite space emperor and one of my worst impressions. He wasn't a popular choice for the job, as he really only came to power through a series of misfortunes. All of this leads to a lackluster leader who, when he retired to an island off the coast of Italy, rewarded his mediocre work with some stuff to do with younger people that I just can't say on YouTube. Apparently, he became a heavy drinker and got himself involved in all kinds of vices. It is speculated that Emperor Caligula was a child on this island and may have witnessed this debauchery. It's speculated that this may have influenced his acts of sin, and honestly not sure what to call, as these guys are, I don't know what you call this, these guys are all messed up, man, I don't know, they're just crazy. Number 2, no holidays. Septimus Severus sounds like a brothel related disease in the Harry Potter universe. But actually, he was a traditional guy. He liked things Roman and wanted to keep it that way. So, when the Jewish and Christian faith made their way to Rome, he wasn't a happy guy. So he had them persecuted. The only thing saving these people from a short Roman sword was if they worshipped the emperor and the emperor gods as well. For some reason, that made him a little more forgiving. However, considering he wasn't the only emperor to feel this way, I would think again before decorating a Christmas tree or lighting a menorah in Rome. Of course, I'm only making humor of what probably was an awful time for those religious factions. We like to romanticize Rome, but she's not all perfect. Number 1, eye for an eye. Empress Irene of the Eastern Roman Empire may have been a woman, but was just as ruthless and bloodthirsty as her male counterparts. While a lot of people probably had an issue with her leading as a woman, I'd like to hope more people today have a problem with her politics and how she came to power. A little unaliving here, cozying up over there, playing the game until she got what she wanted. And there was this one time that she wasn't too happy with her son's politics, and it was likely he was going to have her power removed, so he needed to go on a timeout. She had some guards gouge his eyes out, which mortally wounded him. No big deal or anything. I guess there was no timeout corner back then. I went to Rome to the chief's palace. He bestowed upon me this wisdom after learning about Irene. That ain't it. That's gonna wrap it up for me today, guys. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe here at Bumblebee. If you too want to live the life of a decadent Roman emperor, then check out my socials in the link down below. I've been your host, Big Chet, and stay sweet, my little honeybees. Taxes that were taxes. Caracalla. Emperor Caracalla. What now? Emperor Caracalla. There we go, baby. Number 10, population. Here's the thing, folks. When you do the whole slave thing, you may need more than one. Maybe two. Okay, 10 tops. No more than that. Okay, maybe like thousands. Yes, this was true of ancient Rome. While it is difficult to calculate the exact number of people who were slaves, some historians speculate that at least 10% of the population were slaves. And if that number doesn't feel right to you, it's because some say it could really be as high as 20%. That's a lot of folks. And honestly, if we're to study history and understand the mistakes of the past, well, having that many slaves means there's probably more people to join in the angry mob and the revolts, because you have slaves and people don't like that. Number 9, the act itself. I know I didn't have to tell you this, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. The act itself. Now, just an idea, and this is gonna make some corporate overlords faint, but when I say this, maybe we shouldn't put our fellow man in chains and shackles and be forced to complete hard labor for no wage and they're treated like dirt. Just an idea. Less than dirt, actually, sometimes. Look, I know sometimes we as humans don't get along. As a Canadian, playing hockey in school always changed my behavior. I think Chris would agree with this too. We could be the sweetest students ever, but when we get out of that rink, something changes. You start seeing Stanley Cups and Maple Leafs, and probably a forced deal with a very popular coffee shop chain. But all that seething Canadian rage never made me want to treat people the way slaves were treated. What I'm getting at is, even at our worst, we would never do that. I wouldn't do that, Chris wouldn't do that, we're not gonna do that. Number 8, work to work. I guess one slightly good thing about being a Roman slave is that, well, if you could even call a good thing in that, really, is that there was a chance to work for your freedom. Literally slaving away in the hot Roman sun for years just so you can get your freedom, so you can work and sweat in the hot Roman sun for years for very little pay. And that's so great when you put it that way. I hope there's a sunscreen budget. Some slaves could buy their freedom, some were freed by their masters, and getting freed was actually a big deal, as there was sometimes a ceremony where a slave and then a public official would touch the head of the slave of the staff. Abracadabra, alakazam, wishy-washy, sloshy, poof. Magic, you're free now. So simple, right? Almost like it didn't have to happen in the first place. Huh? Number 7, second-class citizen. You may have heard this term thrown around a little bit, but becoming a citizen of Rome was kind of a big deal. Your social status kind of defined how you lived. You'd think being a slave, sweating away in the Mediterranean sun wasn't bad enough. There was a lot of red tape to go with this as well. So many rules. When freeing slaves, no more than 100 at a time could be freed. Okay, but I have a few issues with that. If your house has 100 slaves, you probably ain't gonna give up 100 in the first place. Now, the rule says under no circumstances can you free 100 slaves at one time. Okay, what if you break it up? Say you do 50 at a time. What if you do 99 slaves and leave one until later? What if you release one at 11:59 and then the rest at midnight? What if some of the slaves are missing limbs from hard labor and only count as half? Let's say you release 99 and one half slaves at 11:59 and the last half at midnight. You see what I'm saying? There's too many rules. I can't deal with that, man. Too many rules. No. Number 6, foundation. Okay, everyone loves Rome. Who doesn't? You got your legions, you got your colosseums, you got your aqueducts. Oh, it's a big deal. As it turns out, the Romans were good at building stuff. Most impressive, honestly, was their roads. I know that's not as cool as the buildings, but trust me, anyone who actually knows architecture in the comments is gonna quietly nod their head and agree with me, and so yeah, he's right, actually, yeah. Roman roads last 2,000 years. Toronto is still waiting for the Eglinton Crosstown. That's a local inside joke, but trust me, it'll slap. Where the hell is that thing? Come on. The point I'm getting at is Romans built a lot of great stuff, and it could not have been so without the efforts of the many slaves who built their roads, tended their farms, and did just about everything, honestly. It was built on the whole thing. Number 5, collars. Collars were made for animals, dogs, cattle. No one likes wearing them. Well, maybe except a certain anthropomorphic community, that is. You know what I'm talking about. Sadly though, Roman slaves did wear collars, similar to dog tags in the military. It's a form of identification, and you know that said person is a slave, which in case you didn't know was super uncool. Anyone who says otherwise is just off, or if I had to take a guess, they're the same people who would choose to side with Caesar's Legion in Fallout New Vegas. You know gosh darn well that the NCR is the right choice, and or also leading the Las Vegas Strip by yourself. I mean, come on, who doesn't want to be the CEO of 3 luxurious casinos in the Mojave Wasteland? But I digress. The callers are naughty. They're bad. Don't do that. Especially the explosive ones. I don't like it. Number 4, currency. There's something that just tickles my fancy when thinking about Roman gold coins. Maybe it's my inner historian, or maybe it's because my persona is Wario. Wario likes gold. Can't blame me. However, the Roman denarius is not what we're talking about right now. I'm talking about the ancients' other favorite currency, flesh and bone. Unfortunately for the slaves of Rome, they were traded, bought, and sold like an item, or used as a currency. When you build a whole society around such a horrible thing, this just kind of makes sense. It adds up. To make bad things even worse, sometimes when Rome was expanding or the Gauls got a little too close to Rome and some borders were being exchanged, it often meant that some slaves would change hands too. And by that, I mean they were taken and put to work for another boss that was probably less nice to them since they didn't come from the same area. Boy, history sure is mean sometimes. I tell you, that history, oh boy. Number 3, the bathhouse. I didn't think this was going to be a secret to anyone, but the slaves weren't just working in the fields or putting up some arches that last longer than most marriages. No, some poor folks had the duty of polishing pearls, smoking the salami, waxing the carrot, and finger fishing for clams. I think you get my point. Yes, the oldest profession in the world, however, it wasn't exactly a profession in this case, more like it had to be done or there would be consequences. Eugh. For me, brothels might sound great on paper, but when you're laying down in the doctor's office and he's trying to scrape barnacles off your piece of deal, well, I can't say I didn't warn you. Number 2, gladiators. Guys, I actually learned something today. I know, right? Imagine little old me learning something. Gladiators, you know them, you love them. The movie is okay in my opinion. The warriors who duked it out in the Roman Colosseum weren't always brought in chains. Some were volunteers actually. Honestly, as I was writing this, I thought to myself, well, gosh darn it there, feller. If that don't sound like that's the Hunger Games. That's right, being dragged away from your family and forced to fight in blood sport. All you're missing is Donald Sutherland's buttery smooth voice. I also can't help myself in mentioning this, but probably the first battle royale ever too. So maybe it's just a part of us. Something about the last man standing that we love so much, and why I want to spend all my savings on Fortnite skins. Number 1, thumbs up, very nice. Listen, we've all seen the movie. Joaquin Phoenix is standing there looking all Roman-like and looking into the heart of Russell Crowe, knowing damn well this will probably be his last blockbuster. That's just how it goes. There in suspense, the audience waits to see what his thumbs do to decide his fate. Well, this is true of the Roman slaves in the Colosseum, however, there's a couple things that differ from the movie. 1, being not all who went into battle perished, and 2, the thumbs down might be what you want, actually, not the thumbs up. Meaning that the thumbs up meant yes, go ahead and finish the plebeian. A thumbs down, a fist, or even waving a cloth might have meant no, spare the poor soul, have mercy. All I know is that I do not volunteer as tribute. Sorry, Prim. That's gonna wrap it up for me today, folks, and make sure to comment and subscribe here at Bumblebee and give us a real thumbs up, not a Roman one. We want the very nice one. Yes, very nice, we like. And if you like when I make fun of celebrities, then check out my socials linked down below. I've been your host, Big Ched, and stay sweet, my little honeybees.